And it is exactly that, a short history of timekeeping, although there are other things that I will be talking about which aren't in the talk, or aren't on the poster. Now, I want to begin with the Wendell Fiener clock collection. Clock, we called it, those two descriptions, the Wendell Fiener clock collection, Clocks of the Island, 1770 to 1960. And Wendell is here tonight, and he comes from Summerside and has been collecting clocks for some 30 or more years. Raise your hand, Wendell, so they know where you are. So it was a much appreciated and very valuable donation to the museum, and in effect made the Bedeque Area Historical Museum Prince Edward Island's clock museum. No other museum on the island can match us in that respect. And it was opened, the exhibit was opened in July 2023 by Lieutenant Governor Antoinette Perry, shown there. And so it has been on display now for 3 summers. And you will know it, some of you will have walked through it and looked at the various clocks. It's a great, 178 clocks were donated by Wendell. He could have donated 600 if we had the space, but we just couldn't have accepted so many. So we got, I think, a very good selection of the representative and of the best of the period and of each type of clock. And I'll just go through these rather quickly because you can see these in real life. The posters for the exhibit were done by a summer student, Lucas MacDonald, in 2022. And Lucas was exceptionally good at making posters and needed very little help from me and in terms of all aspects of design and content. And I just want to point out 2 clocks in the exhibit, which are especially important. I'm not going to be talking about or giving a survey of the exhibit, but I just want to do this at the start. The John Adams long case or grandfather clock, which arrived at the New London settlement in 1774. And you've got a picture, as I will show you, but this is coming into the wilderness, this clock, which is shown there. And so it's among the oldest. We have some older clocks than that, but it is among the oldest, and it's the oldest of known provenance, of known history. It's a grandfather type, unknown maker, made in England about 1750. And Wendell received it in a rather poor state, but as he does with many clocks, he restored both the mechanism, brought it back to working order, and also the case to its very fine appearance. Just to point out the New London settlement, this is Holland's map of 1775, one of the printed copies, and you'll notice there, on this version, the New London settlement is recognized, and Elizabethtown. So otherwise, that whole area was totally forested. It was making an impression on a wilderness area. And this illustration comes from the Atlantic Neptune of 1777, and it's from Nova Scotia, but the island would have looked somewhat similar, if a little flatter. And John Cousins, in his book, New London, the Lost Dream, from which this illustration has been taken, shows it was a Quaker settlement to begin with. But John Adams, the clock owner, was not a Quaker, but it was a Quaker venture from London. And the lineage of the Adams family, starting with John, born 1734, is as shown: John, Jonathan, Alfred, Keith Alfred, and then Jean, whose son donated, Jean Prophet, whose son donated the clock to the museum, as when Jean's house was being cleared. She was very pleased that it was being preserved and saved and recognized its significance. The other clock came a year later, was a later arrival last summer, 2024, is the Robert Hogg long case clock from the Blue Shank Road, which arrived on the Blue Shank Road in 1841 according to family genealogy. It's shown there in its finished state, and it is a oak long case clock, comes from Dumfriesshire Long. It has the label Longhome on it. We can't make out the maker's name, but it comes from the borders of Scotland, England, I think about 1800. And so both are in running order. On the Blue Shank Road in 1841, it was just being opened up for settlement, and there is not Robert Hogg, but a son at the spot where the family established their farm, and it's still in the ownership of descendants. And this is a descendant, Roberta Hogg, born Roberta Hogg, a fifth-generation island hog, and her niece, Tammy Hogg, posed beside the clock last summer. Now, that's as much as I'm going to say about the collection. There are many other clocks there, but those are the ones that are especially significant. But I want to speculate on and its time in the island, time in a pioneer settlement. And this is going to be a diverse, I've grabbed things from all sorts of areas that in the last few years as we have been organizing the display. But those two families that brought clocks were exceptional, and especially to bring a long case clock. And in fact, they would probably, in some cases, just bring the clock mechanism, and the case would be made over here, as we shall see in some of the records that have turned up. But most pioneer families did not bring a clock to Prince Edward Island in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And for many years, they didn't have either the means, the money, basically, or the inclination. They managed quite well without clocks. Instead, they marked time by the sun, by necessity, and set the pattern of their daily working environment, their daily activities by the movement of the sun. And especially important were sunrise, which varies throughout the year, sun at noon, when you can see the sun directly overhead and decide that that is the middle of the day, and sunset were key points of the working day. And you have to picture that this is a rather romanticized picture of the first settlement. This is in New Brunswick. We don't have many illustrations, so unfortunately artists did not come to the island. Written accounts we have lots, but not many. This is New Brunswick by W.H. Bartlett, who traveled through Canada and did illustrations. And it shows, and this, although romanticized, would not be dissimilar to what pioneer families would face here. And there's not much room for a clock in that log house. And almost all settlers built log houses. They didn't call them log cabins, always log houses. That's an Americanism that hasn't crept into the literature or Canada in the literature. This is a more realistic portrayal. This one is near Chatham, which is in Western Ontario, south of London, in 1838 by Philip John Bainbridge. But you can imagine this is what Prince Edward Island would have looked like, log house after log house. We have one illustration of a log house from the island that survived. 1918, a log house at Orwell, and the old couple probably never changed. They were probably either one of them was born in the house, and they saw no need to change. The main activity in the early years was land clearing. And this is the process of clearing the town plot at Stanley, New Brunswick. That's north of Fredericton, a well-documented settlement by a land company. And so they brought artists. And this is the activity: burning, cutting, burning, labor, and not much time to admire the fine things of life. You had to continually work at clearing the land. And this is another illustration. It's an American illustration, but it shows all of the activities involved. This is 1880, but even in the 1880s in the United States, there was still land clearance going on. We have an interesting, so this is the situation. No clocks, as I said, or very few clocks. And we have direct evidence of that from a Bedeque man, John Baker Skierman. Now, he was the son of Isaac, who was the son of William the Loyalist. And he lived, or was born, in Isaac's house, which still stands, and it was called, or I don't know if it still is, Frog Farm. So it's near the Dunk River. They must have had frogs down there. It's I don't have an illustration of it to show you, but you have to go down the road towards it's. As you're going across to the bridge, there's a side road. What's it called? Does anyone know? Pardon? No.
A small little road?
A short little road down to the shore. The house is at the end there.
Yeah.
A little bit modified. That's where he was born. And what he wrote, he was talking, he's written an excellent, well, a beautiful account that it's amazing how much he's put into it. It's called, it was published in the Island magazine only in 1982 for the first time under the title Bedeque Story. And he talks about many things, but the one thing I'm going to draw out of it is he's talking about frolics, as they were, parties or group activity in which there was entertainment. And the chief frolic, and one we all liked best, was the fulling frolic. Two gangs were always in attendance, and each gang worked half an hour, and if there was no timepiece, we would mark a candle, and each gang worked till our piece of candle was burned. So, no candle in the house, which was likely to be the case. Does anyone know what fulling is? I'll explain that in a minute, but I thought it would be interesting to expand your education in that respect. This is what is called a candle clock. This is a German candle clock, more elaborate, but they would just mark an ordinary candle and take turns. No one had a timepiece, no clock, no watch in the house. But I thought it worthwhile, he describes it, so I'll use his description. And these are quoting from his memoirs. First, a bench was made about high enough to be as high as our hips. On this bench, and this is outside, I would think, could be, the cloth and its wool-woven cloth was laid, carried around the bench being about 8 or 10 feet long according to the quantity of cloth. This is a necessary process in processing woven cloth, and it's still done today, but it's done mechanically. The cloth was wrung out of warm water, put in warm water, wrung out, laid on the bench, and then covered with soap. And then a gang of 10 or 12 would get round the bench, 5 or 6 on a side, and push the cloth back and forward till it was done. So it goes one way, the other. I've seen films of this done still in the Highlands of Scotland. While we were fulling, a song was always sung, and the songs would follow the beat of the pushing. Now, the real part that he enjoyed, after it was done, the bench was cleared away, and we danced till near daylight, and then went home with our girls in the morning. Now, nearly every family would have a fulling frolic every autumn, and we used to look forward to them. We would expect a good tea at supper, and about 12 or 1 o'clock we would have a goose supper, and as much as 2 gallons of rum, and we generally had a good time. So you can see one fulling frolic after the other. Well, if you're out all day clearing trees, burning old debris, this is what you enjoy, and this is what he remembers in his old age, the good times of his youth, when alcohol flowed freely and parties went to daylight. Here's a fulling frolic in Scotland in 1772, illustrating. Now in Scotland it was mostly done by women, and sometimes with the feet. And this is the one I've seen. They keep that tradition, or have revived it in Scotland, and they sing in Gaelic, and there's a main singer and the others respond, and the cloth goes one way and the cloth the other. So I'm sure in Bedeque they weren't singing in Gaelic, and also in Bedeque it involved both men and women, as it does in Nova Scotia. So I've elaborated on that. That's a fulling frolic, but the only point I was taking out of it is there are no timepiece in the house, but I thought it would be interesting to see that. Now, the next object, I actually have it here, is this object. This is a calling horn, and it was used on the Robert Burns, of unknown age. I don't know how long it had been in the family, but it was donated to the museum by Ralph Burns in 2018, and it was used on his father's farm, and it was his mother who used it. And it wasn't a case, in that case, of having no clock in the house, but of telling other people who were in the field when the food was ready on the table. And these were also used in Prince Edward Island. And this one, of course, is one that was. And one of our students, Fiona, in the 2018, actually could make quite a loud sound of this. I am totally unable, but anyone who's got the ability to play a trumpet or would make it makes a very loud call. You may have, I have seen these objects. A conch shell. At my grandparents, there was a conch shell with a hole in it, and this also served the same purpose. And these were brought from the West Indies. It's a Caribbean, the Queen conch, and brought to the shells brought from, and a hole made in the surface or at the tip there, and it would make a very loud sound. So it's a way of making a noise so that other people can respond or learn at a particular time has arrived during the day. For those who did have a clock, now those few that did have a clock, and eventually as the land was cleared, people did acquire clocks, such as the families we just discussed. If their clock stopped, and that was not uncommon, you could set it to the correct time from the sun at its midday zenith, as measured by shadows. That was the only way. You know, your neighbors might not have a clock. 30-hour clock would frequently stop. They may not have kept good time anyway. Some of them were quite cheap. And so if your clock stopped, you could determine, if it was on a sunny day, if you knew when the sun was high overhead, and you could guess. It would be guessing in some respects. Or you could put a nail or peg in the side of the house, or look at the shadows as they move. And that was one of the methods. Though such sun time differed across the island, and it would, from East Point to West Cape, the difference was only 10 minutes. So it was, when it's noon in East Point, it's still 10 to 12 at West Cape. And in those days, there'd be no communication, so it didn't matter. Only about 10 minutes, not an amount to cause a concern, and given the inexactness of most clocks, and perhaps even some clocks today, and the lack of a need for exact punctuality, there wasn't much concern. However, a more accurate way to set a clock to the correct time was to use a sundial. And this is the really accurate way, and it's the method that would be used by clockmakers and others, adjusted, if we're on the island, for the island's latitude, the height above the equator, though of course a dial could only be used on a sunny day. So a sundial could be used to read the time on a sunny day, or it could be used to set a clock. And I have discovered, and I think I'm the first person to discover this, unless someone else comes forward, a street plan of Charlottetown dating from about 1800, which shows a public dial, which means a public sundial. And it was near, this is the map of Charlottetown from 1800. It was A map was provided to me by Reg Porter, who's collected all of the maps of the island and studied them. On this particular point, marked by E there in the diagram, and the key, I'll enlarge that. There's E, you can see at the bottom of Pownell and Queen Street, just Water Street, basically, to the south of Water Street. And it says public dial. So they had a public dial as well as a water pump, so that people could, if your clock stopped, you could run down to the public dial on a sunny day, read I assume it was a high quality dial, and I'll show you a very high quality one in a minute, but, and then run home. Okay. It took only 2 minutes to get home, so you could set your clock. Benjamin Chappell. Benjamin Chappell is a very important man in the sort of public records of Charlottetown and of New London. He kept a day book from about 1770, well, it survives from 1778 to 1819. It's full of amazing facts, things that he recorded. And this is one of the things that he recorded. I summarized it there. He was the colony's postmaster, so he was looking after the mail, and timing and such was important to him for several decades. And he records in his work diary that his son Offie, namely Theophilus, who was working on the town dial in 1801, was paid for his work that November by Governor Fanning. So that would be the dial shown in the map of about 1800. And then Chappell himself had his own dial at home, which he replaced in 1814 with a fine brass one. And he also noted on a particular day, he fixed Mrs. Dawson's sundial post. So there were other people who had sundials as well. This is an attempt in the late mid-19th century to show Charlottetown's first post office. The dates given there is by J. Newberry. It says from 1766 to 1836. The first date is totally wrong. Charlottetown only began in 1770, and Chappell only moved to Charlottetown in 1778. So that's a sort of whimsical picture of the house. It looks to be a log house, and there are lots of, in Chappell's day book, lots of descriptions which enable you to work out the rooms and the activities. Now, on the more sophisticated sundials, the time could be read to the nearest minute, and I'll show you a sundial in Charlottetown's present public dial, where you can do that. And with some dials, even recording on the dial face the number of minutes to be added or subtracted on each particular day in order to get the true mean clock time, and I'll mention this in a moment, in line with the so-called equation of time. The equation of time, the actual time that you read on the sundial that the sun's shadow is casting, is in error slightly because of the movement of the Earth. It changes every day around the sun. This has long been known, and it's precisely calculated, the correction you have to apply. And the equation of time describes the discrepancy between two kinds of solar time: the apparent solar time, as read from the sundial, and the calculated mean solar time, which corrects for variations due to the sun's orbit during the year. And apparent or sundial time can be as much as 16 minutes out ahead of the mean solar time, or as much as 13 minutes behind, and this will happen on particular days. So you have to, if you want to get the correct time, if you're that particular, you could be out considerably unless you use these corrections. Thus, to find the true mean time, a correction has to be applied. And here's a graph which shows the mean. This is the clock or mean. This is the true time, if you like, the time you want. But the sundial time is in excess of. These are minutes. This is the year at the bottom. So as you move from January to December, at some points in the year, in February, the clock is the sundial is out by over 12 minutes. It's right on certain days of the year, and I don't understand the astronomy of it, what the Earth is doing, but astronomers were able to work this out very precisely. and long ago, even before the 19th century. And it was known. So it was known that you couldn't read the timing directly from a sundial. On sophisticated sundials, these corrections in the form of the number of minutes to be added or subtracted were inscribed in their metal faces. And then almanacs, and I'll mention those in a moment, and certainly those printed on the island from the 1850s, recorded the correction for each particular day. And thus, those islanders who were fastidious about timekeeping had the option of applying this correction when resetting their clocks using a sundial. And you will find the current public dial, since 2012, is in Holland College, right in the quadrangle or square there. And I, last summer, on a particular day, I think it was July 30th, went for the first time and saw it. And there it is. It's a very expensive dial, and it's a replica, an exact replica, made in England, of Captain Samuel Holland's sundial of 1773. He gave to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire in that year a sundial. And this is the original sundial that Holland gave. And the gnomon, or the middle part, the angled part, is missing on the Dartmouth College, but it's in their museum there. And a replica was made, but readjusted for the latitude of Charlottetown. This is you see inscribed on the original, it says, "The gift of Samuel Holland, Esquire, His Majesty's Surveyor General of Lands for the Northern District of North America, to Dartmouth College, New Hampshire." Now this was before the American Revolution, and Holland was surveying the entire coastline of New England at that time, after he had done Prince Edward Island. This is the dial in at Holland College, the replica, and I took this photograph on July 30th last summer at 10:55 a.m. Atlantic Daylight Time. And another view of the same time within a short moment, I took this view, and I'm going to change I'm just shifting the photograph around so we can read. But you can see there the shadow cuts the rim of the sundial, and I just moved the photograph. And there's the line, and it's the very edge of the, which will tell you the time. Now, you have 9 IX, and if you read you're reading 9, 10, 20, 30, and the actual time there is, I can work out, you can read it to 9:37 a.m. You can read it that precisely on that sundial. However, a sundial is more clever than that. It has the equation of time built right into and this was not uncommon for expensive sundials. And you can see there that this is for the month of July, and you've got days which proceed from up to each day of the month is shown there, and below it is and I'll just cut go to the next. It cuts into a segment which indicates 5 days. So not only can you read the exact time from it, you can then make the correction so that you get the proper mean time. And I'm going to do a bit of, the sundial time was 9:37 a.m. So to get the mean solar time at Charlottetown, now according to the equation of time inscribed on the dial face, we need to add 5 minutes. So that's 9:42 a.m. That's the correct time. But we need to convert to Atlantic Standard Time. That Atlantic Standard Time is not Charlottetown time, and I'll explain that later. But that involves adding an extra 12.5 minutes. Thus, the mean solar time on 30th of July was 9:37 plus 5 plus 12.5 equals 9:54.5 a.m. but we need to convert to daylight saving time. And so it told me at the top, it was 10:55 a.m. I said, oh, well, yes, it's working. It's better than my watch. And this, if you do go to see it, and I recommend it, within the, just inside the Holland College main front door, they have a display on Samuel Holland, and this little plaque explains everything on it, but it's not out on the sundial, so you'd have to go in, and it's just telling you to do what I have done. I mentioned Benjamin Chappell, but just referring to clocks in his diary as well, we have, he made many references to his clock, so I'm going to share these with you. 1775, he was then at New London, in the same place where the Adams clock was, by the way, same settlement, Quaker settlement. Monday at cleaning my clock. And then, this is interesting, 1778 in his day book, he records on successive days working to make Wednesday the 9th made clock case, chest of, and a chest of drawers. And then he's made case for the top of the clock. These, it must be a long case clock. It has a case at the top. And then on Saturday, at making of cases for our clock and goods. So he was a skilled joiner, carpenter, and he could make very fine furniture, and especially spinning wheels was his sort of speciality in terms of hundreds he made. But he also made clock cases for himself. And he might, I wonder, you know, I don't know if he made the case for the Adams clock, because the woods are probably not island woods at all, but imported. And then 1798, he's now in Charlottetown, helped the clock to strike, etc. And that ye, that is the rather than ye, that y is a abbreviation for th. Helped the clock to strike. 1800, 28th March, got the clock to go. So the clock was a particular concern of his, and you know, a very probably relatively expensive, and being the postmaster, 1800, Monday, we set on to do something to the clock. Got Mr. Bagnall. She goes better than before. So Bagnall did and made an improvement in it. 1803, also cleaned our clock. And then 4th of April, 1804, Mr. Bagnall's back again cleaning the clock. I don't know if he, you'd wonder, does he include every reference to the clock, but 1806, Friday, the clock set a-going by Mr. Havard. Went off well, so Mr. Bagnall has either lost the job or is not doing the proper job. Well, so, you know, clocks were important, but especially clocks suddenly became cheaper. By the 1820s, clocks were becoming more common on the island because their mechanized production in the USA, and especially in Connecticut, began to greatly reduce their costs. And many examples, we have a little symbol for the Connecticut flag, and you'll see practically perhaps half of the older clocks in the exhibit are Connecticut clocks in the collection. And I'm not going to go into it, but it was through a sort of mechanized production of assembly line and improvements in materials, replacing wooden with brass parts, and turning clockmaking, which before that was a sort of artisan, single, special, a person would make the whole clock. Now you have workers doing particular things. It's the beginning of industrial clock production. And it was so successful in Connecticut that there are many companies that established and continued right into the 20th century. But such cheaply made clocks, many needing daily winding, often had to have their time reset. And how they reached this part of the world, British North America, is that they were sold by peddlers. These men had a reputation for dishonesty and shoddy merchandise, and there is a book, it's widely quoted in clock history, written by Thomas Halliburton of Nova Scotia, a judge, and it's called, it's about Sam Slick, the Yankee clock peddler. Now, I have not read it. I know when I was going to school, Canadian literature, it was mentioned as a classic, and I still have to read it. It's still in print, and it enjoyed a wide readership in the US, well, British North America, where it was set in Nova Scotia, the United States, and the UK. And this is an illustration from, here's your Yankee peddler coming up to sell to Nova Scotians, unsophisticated Nova Scotians. He pitches a clock. And he's satirizing his own people in Nova Scotia as well. And it's still in print, and here's another version of Sam's Flick and unsophisticated Nova Scotians. And here's another version as well. It's humor and satire as well, and I will have to read it. Evidence for clocks, and what are in Bedeque? What evidence do we have for clocks? Well, it comes mostly from wills and inventories, and these are some that I've covered in talks in the last few years. William Spearman of Bedeque in Wilmot Valley died in 1819, and it took his executors, who were his sons, 7 years to do an inventory. And we've looked at this inventory before in my talk on William Spearman, but you'll notice one 8-day clock is a possession of it. This is the 1826, and we have in the collection from Wendell, it could be something like this. This is an 1820 Connecticut-made clock, wooden movement, 8-day runtime, maker Henry Terry, called half pillar in splat, which is the description of the half pillar and splat decorative features. So that isn't William Spearman's clock. We don't know where it is, if it still exists, but it could be something like that. Nathaniel Wright, last summer I talked about Nathaniel. This is his house still today. When Nathaniel died, he wrote a last will and testament on the 16th of April 1825, and he said, "I give and bequeath to my son Stephen, my dear son Stephen, my 8 days clock." So this is, there are other items which he gives, but the clock was especially important and valuable. And it could have been a clock like this, another Connecticut clock dating from about 1830, it could be the 1820s. This is another of Wendell's donations. Triple-decker, half-pillar clock, maker Burge and Fuller, Bristol, Connecticut, about 1830. An 8-day run clock time. And then Nathaniel's brother Stephen also had a clock. And it turns up, and Stephen did not write a will. He died in 1841 unexpectedly. And so an inventory was done by his executors. And it included one clock. And so I just included another from Wendell's collection. This is a half-pillar and splat clock. Maker or seller Moses Barrett, Yarmouth, Nova Scotia, operating, or at least it could be in the period 1820 to 1830. Wooden movement, 30-hour runtime. These clocks are the types of clocks that they would have. These large mantle clocks that are about 2 feet high or so. I mentioned almanacs, the role of almanacs. Now, almanacs are still produced, but I don't know. Does anyone buy an annual almanac still? No one? Once in a while. They're still made, and they still carry the same information. And it's especially important is as the astronomical information about the sun's movements and the moon, and then other information, lots of local, padded out with information lifted from other almanacs as well. So you can imagine in a pioneer household on Prince Edward Island, the almanac, everyone would have bought an almanac. They would have been fingered and read, and they were cheaply produced, and very few of them have survived as a result. Importantly, from the point of view of timekeeping, island almanacs gave the time of sunrise and sunset at Charlottetown based on astronomical calculations. So they were supposedly, and did, apply to Charlottetown. Now, they also enabled those who wish to be more precise in setting their clocks to use the equation of time. Now, the earliest surviving almanac, island almanac, and it isn't necessarily the first at all, is from 1836, printed by James Hazard, the King's printer. However, its sunrise and sunset times are probably not for Charlottetown. He's lifted them from some other almanac, perhaps Halifax, because they don't, that doesn't change annually, but his are out by. So he was just lifting it. This is the copy of it, 1836. It's in fairly good condition and is in the public archives. That's the front page and the page for January. And if you we enlarge the January page, you'll notice across the top, it even predicts the weather. I don't know, it says appearance of snow. I suppose this would be a little game for people to play, see how often the almanac hit the, but you could certainly not predict the weather. But it has sunrise, so the first, the sun symbol rises at 7:40, and as I said, these these are probably not correct. Anyone who would check it would find, oh, the sun's not following the almanac, or the almanac the sun. So those are the rises and settings of the sun in January. His later almanacs from the 1850s, so Hazard continued to produce an almanac for some time, do specify that they're for the latitude of Charlottetown, and they contain corrections for the equation of time. It says sun, that's the sun symbol, slow of clock. The sun is 3.43 minutes behind the clock. And you can see it's changing each day in minutes and seconds even, that you can correct your clock to get to the right time. And in the same almanac, there is a description of how to use it and explaining the equation of time, which I'm just putting that up for demonstration. That he's explaining the difference between clock time and sun time, and so his readers will be able to make use of it. These are just later almanacs. Here's one, 1857. The page title is torn at the top. And then Chappell's almanacs continue in the later part of the century with very detailed equation of time going into even seconds by that time. They're giving the exact, you could correct your clock to the second. So almanacs were very important. At some point, there's time being called, 8 o'clock already. At some point, the island government adopted a standardized time, common time for the whole island, which was based on the solar mean time in the capital. But I haven't been able to find out exactly when that occurred. There doesn't seem to be any legislation. But certainly by the time the new courthouse was built in 1876, and a clock was installed in it, the provincial clock. It was a gas-powered public clock displaying the time on 3 faces. And here we have it, a picture of it in about 1880. It's the George Coles building, but greatly altered. And so at this stage, this then became the official time on Prince Edward Island. Certainly from 1876, it was on display. And then at that very time, 1876, the Prince Edward Island Railway was it was just opening up. And with the opening of the railway in 1875, there was a need for train timetables. And it became necessary for the government to impose the standard Charlottetown time on the whole island, to actually impose it, which was now possible because of the presence of a telegraph system. So you could telegraph to Tignish and say they could get the time in Charlottetown. Now, I don't know exactly when the telegraph was established throughout the island, but a telegraph cable at the bottom here, it says, was laid from Cape Tormentine to Cape Travers. The island was then connected to the mainland in 1852. So after that, it would have been spreading on the island. However, the trains were seldom on time anyway, and John Rowan, visiting in 1875, reported that in a journey of 40 miles, he was 2.5 hours late, because a herd of cattle belonging to a friend of the engine driver insisted on remaining on the track until the conductor and some passengers got off and drove them home. But even without cows on the track, there would be other problems, the weather, the snow, and everything. And here's an actual locomotive built in 1876 and in use on the island from 1887. Here's a picture of the train going, Meacham's Atlas, 1880, and emphasizing progress. And here's the train going through Elliot in the middle of the province. And here is a picture of the conductors from Stanley Leclerc's drawings. He was as a young man, worked on the railway, and the crew coordinates their watches so that they all have the same time. So time was very important on the railway, more so in big centres like England and the United States and Canada, where if your trains were off by, crashes occurred and deaths of people, and it had greatly affected the standardizing of time. A timetable from 1875, the first year of the Prince Edward Island Railway, appears to use Island Standard Time. And here's that timetable that's been preserved and is in the archives. We'll look at it a bit more closely. I just want to give you an idea. We no longer live in the time of the Prince Edward Island Railway, but here is the, you could leave Charlottetown at 8:15 a.m. and arrive in Summerside at 12. So that's 3 hours, 45 minutes. I thought, well, it'd be interesting, how far could you travel with a horse in that distance? Well, the journey time there, 3 hours, 45 minutes, or 3 hours, 55 if you took the afternoon train. And that probably didn't change too much during the... But compare horse travel. Now, we're lucky to have Sir George Seymour, and I've published his journals in the Island Magazine, on the 25th of August, 1840, and he was the head of the Admiralty, worked his way up in England. He left Government House and he records everything meticulously in a light four-wheeled wagon drawn by a single horse with 3 men in it, and he arrived at St. Eleanor's at 4:30 p.m. Journey time including stops at Bagnall's Inn, that's at Hazel Grove, Haslam's Inn at Springfield, and Barrett's Farm, or Barrett's Cross, later called now Kensington, to bait and change the horses. Has anyone ever heard of the term to bait a horse? I asked, I'd never heard of that term. I asked my cousin, mother's cousin, and she said, oh yes, we used to use that term. It's feeding a horse. You bait the horse. Well, we're out of the period of, you've heard of the, perhaps it's still used for horses. It took 7 hours and 15 minutes, including changes of horses. They changed a horse at one of the inns. So, well, not much better than traveling by horse. Well, I suppose it cuts it by 40% the journey with the train. I just want to, you might be more interested in people who live in Tignish. The train would leave at 7 a.m. island time and arrive at Summerside at 12, so 5 hours to get from Tignish to Summerside. Well, it took 7 hours with a horse from Charlottetown. So the journey time, 5 hours, 45 minutes. The timetable appears to use Island Standard Time, as I said. However, in the 1880s, the Island Railway became part of the Intercolonial Railway and was required to use Eastern Standard Time. That's the time in Ontario and Quebec in their timetable, to the great annoyance of islanders. And we have that evidence. It meant that when you got the timetable, but you had to be aware that you had to be, it was calling you an hour earlier than you really, the 6 a.m. departure time listed in the timetable for Charlottetown to Tignish would actually leave at 7. And here's the timetable to prove it. There's the Intercolonial Railway, by the way, the Prince Edward Island Railway connecting at various points there with it. And if we enlarge that timetable, you can see Eastern Standard Time. And the Tignish train now leaves at 6 a.m. But all islanders would know there was no change whatsoever. It was still leaving at 7 a.m., but the timetable says at 6 a.m. Well, that shows the dominance. The islanders would think we should never have joined the Confederation for that. Well, buying a clock, and there's some very good illustrations in Meacham's 1880 Atlas. And this, I'm just taking, this is for E.W. Taylor's jewelry store interior on this side here on the left, and on the right the exterior. So you can we show these slightly larger. There's the exterior view, English and American clocks and watches, and they're shown in the window there, and many of those you can identify in Wendell's collection as well. And in the interior of the shop, we've got a regulator clock on the side, a very precise clock which can be used to set the times of clocks as they're sold. And we've got at the back, you'll see a regulator clock in the collection there. At the back, you've got even on clock toppers, as they're called, horses and perhaps a fox, which you can add as in addition to your clock. And you'll notice a clock topper in the collection that Wendell has given us. This is another tailor, George Taylor and Company Jewelry Store, also in Meacham's Atlas. This is on the north side of Queen Square. And this business persisted up until May 25th this year. This is the location in 1910. And I learned, somebody came to the talk a few weeks ago, was looking at the clocks, and said, oh, my family was involved, and they just closed this year. And here's their store closing, going out of business. 17th of May was the closing date, everything on sale, and you know it says Taylor's Jewelers since 1979. 1879, yes. And it was an Englishman who came to Charlottetown and opened up the store, and it's survived until 2025. You could also, we're now into the latter half of the 19th century, but you could also buy a clock from the catalogue. And the earliest examples in Canada that I come across, Eaton's catalogue, 1901, and this is more or less showing many of the clocks that we have in our collection. And the period from about 1860 to about 1940, 50 was the sort of golden age of clocks, and clocks were in high demand and of great varieties and many types. And everyone had to have a clock. It was a status symbol in the home. Here's Holman's Spring Summer Catalogue 1916. And we'll enlarge that, and you can see clocks similar to what we have in the collection. Look at the prices. $5.35. Inflation has really torn away at us since then. And they even had Holman's, there's an alarm clock and a fancy cast metal clock for $1.50. I mentioned the adoption of Atlantic Standard Time in 1880. Well, I mentioned Atlantic Standard Time. I didn't mention the adoption. I'll now discuss that. People were being concerned internationally, how do we regulate time across the globe? And in 1889, there was an international conference in Washington, 1884, at which Canada was represented. It established 24 different time zones, and we know these to this very day, circling the globe. And island time was found to be 12 minutes and 29 seconds behind the new Atlantic Standard Time. I'll explain why that is so. The prime meridian was chosen, that is going through Greenwich Mean Time at 0. Atlantic time, the meridian for Atlantic time, 60 degrees west. The green zone here is 60 degrees west. That is exactly 4 hours ahead of, or behind Greenwich Mean Time. But Charlottetown is actually not at 60 degrees west. It's at 60 degrees 7 minutes west. So the time will differ, and that's why the clock, when we follow Atlantic Standard Time, you can see possibly Sydney in Cape Breton might be not having to make any adjustment. It would. So after the island government resisted the change for 5 years. I mean, there was always a reluctance on the island to change. And in other places, the Dominion government changed almost immediately, and the island refused, despite the Dominion government offices in the province adopting it. So if you went to the post office, they would be 13, you had to live on double time in Charlottetown or anywhere where there was a government office. And eventually, on the 9th of May, 1889, the island finally moved to Atlantic Standard Time, and mostly due to the advocacy of an island surveyor and businessman, Henry Cundall. And he's well known, Charlottetown businessman, land surveyor, photographer, lived in what is called Beaconsfield House now. It was called Cundall House then. And on the 9th of May, finally, having persuaded the government, Henry Cundall climbed into the clock turret and moved the hands 12 minutes and 29 seconds, thus moving the island into the era of Atlantic Standard Time, which we've been in ever since. The adoption of Atlantic Daylight Time came more recently. Now, daylight saving time had been instituted as an energy-saving measure during the Second World War, and then the island after the war reverted to standard time. And it was a conflict between urban and rural advocates. The farmers, who controlled the legislature disproportionately, felt that the cows would not be able to adjust to the new time, especially milking. When you changed your clock by an hour, what was the poor cow to do? And so what happened, and I can remember this, it was the city, Charlottetown, and the town of Summerside decided, well, we're not going to put up with this. So they, in a couple of summers, changed their time. I lived in Summerside as a youngster, and when we visited my grandparents in St. Eleanor's, we had to be aware that the clock differed by an hour between St. Eleanor's and Summerside, or between Wilmette Valley and Summerside. And there was a long period. It was before this was carried out, but finally Walter Shaw, the Shaw government, and he had been the Minister of Agriculture, but he did it in his first year, within his first year of office, by which time it was felt perhaps the resentment of the farmers would have worn off. So on 25th of June 1960, the island entered fast time, as many people called it, and it had arrived to stay. And here's Walter Shaw, who was Premier at the time. And the provincial clock in the new Law Courts building of 1876, for exactly 100 years, it maintained the official time of the island from the turret. There's a picture of it in 1905. And then, unfortunately, the clock was destroyed in an arson fire. It happened to be the courthouse, and I think someone was resentful of the decision of the judges. And I think it was that simple. In 1976, the building was badly damaged, including the clock was destroyed. And it was replaced by, in the remake of the building, which was fortunately saved and became the George Coles building, by the modern, the current provincial clock, which is an electric clock and much less elaborate than the original. I just want to end with some clocks in island homes that we know about, or references to clocks. And one is Captain Samuel Holland's astronomical clock. Now, an astronomical clock is a sophisticated timepiece that not only indicates the time of day, but also displays relative positions of celestial bodies, sun, moon, zodiac constellations, and it can be used in making calculations. And I lost suddenly it may be a battery problem. My battery has probably succumbed. I think I should change. I'm almost finished, but I could shout.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sure.
The significance of this clock is that it was also a house clock. This is some of its dates. It's now in the National Museum of Civilization or History in Ottawa, but it was built in 1725 by George Graham in London. It spent its first time on Prince Edward Island for a whole year at Fort Amherst and Holland Cove, where Holland was using it as his astronomical calculations. He eventually lived at Quebec City, and in 1801, when Holland died at Quebec, his widow moved to Charlottetown and brought the clock with her. And so it was a house clock in Tryon, and then passed to Holland descendants of St. Eleanor's, and then eventually it was sold, bequeathed to a relative in California and sold to American Airlines. And George Laird of Surrey, who has connections with Bedeque, started a petition to have it repatriated to Canada, which he was successful in achieving. The American Airlines must have decided it was politic to sell it to the Canadian government, and it has returned to the island for temporary museum exhibits in 1970, 2000, and 2015. But it was a house clock as well, and probably the most famous and well-known house clock on the island, and far too grand for the Bedeque Museum. Here's another interesting house, which unfortunately we don't have the clock anymore, but we have a reference to the house, and the house still exists. This is the Anderson Melrose Farm in Fernwood or Seacow Head. This is it, as owned by the Anderson family, the lower diagram here in the 1920s, and this is it in its current state in Fernwood, moved to a different site. But we have a record that the Anderson sisters kept a farm diary, and they recorded January 1877, Tuesday the 30th, Mr. Crew cleaned the clock. And then in April 1880, Mr. Crew cleaned the old clock, and to be paid $1 if it will go for 1 year. Well, that's quite a bargain. And the diary ends on June 30th, 1881, which is over a year later, but there's no record whether Mr. Crew got his... but this diary is quite important. This is the family that kept the diary. Alexander Anderson and his family, 5 daughters and on the farm, and then finally the last child was a son, and 3 of the daughters kept the farm diary. Now I'm going to show you a view, and I'm going to ask you a question. Here's a clock on the mantelpiece, an Auger style clock that refers to the square, the curve of the... Now the question is, whose home is this, and who is the photographer? You all know the name of the photographer. I'll show you, this is a view of the house as well. It's Lucy, it's the McNeil homestead at Cavendish. So she was a photographer. She took the interior pictures, very rare for the period. And this is the parlor in her home. And perhaps Anne of Green Gables was written on that table in part. And there's the house, and there is the totally unknown person at that time, but she was interested in photography. Here's another clock in an island home provided by George Arsenault, who's here tonight, from his collection of photographs. The Wedding at Montcarmel, 1959, and you'll notice a big Auger-style clock on the mantelpiece, but you'll also notice they're into the modern age as well. They've got an electric, which probably is an electric clock, on the, perhaps this is the old clock, maybe because it's an heirloom come down in the family, and I don't know how long it would, but eventually these were sold on to antique dealers. The time seems to be the same on both clocks. Here's another picture, which George has called Les Joueurs de Cartes, the card players. And you'll see here a big clock, gingerbread style, but look what it's given birth to, a little alarm clock as well. So they're all also into the modern age as well. And but I noticed that the two clocks aren't giving the same time. So this must be kept as a family heirloom. And the clock is overseeing the card game, and if anyone is cheating, the clock will know. Finally, I'll show this object, and I'm sure Willard will not forgive me if he realizes I'm putting this on the display here. Willard Burroughs of Wilmot Valley, who worked at Stearman's for many years, saved this steam whistle from M.F. Stearman in Summerside, 40 years ago when they were getting rid of it. And are any of you from Summerside or grew up in Summerside? Nobody. Not myself. Every time, I used to notice it at 12 and 1 o'clock, you'd hear this really loud whistle that would shout across the whole town, into the countryside as well. And I didn't know where it came from, and I think most people didn't know, but this is the device that was producing that whistle. And it's on display in the museum and the clock collection, and steam below would come up through this at such a force that it hits the bell and it gives us a very loud whistle. And trains have them, and I didn't point it out on the train, but it's exactly the same sort of steam whistle. Now, this is a sign of factory time arriving on Prince Edward Island. That the day is being regulated by the business that you work at, the manufacturer, controlling the time of people, rather than the sun. And by the way, it's not this, this isn't a clock in itself. A clock in the office was read, and then someone would release the steam with a lever, and then this was on the roof. So it didn't automatically go off at 9 a.m. and 12 and 1 and 5. But the day was being regulated, and this is increasing the factory. The factory was coming into play, and so we have that. Very grateful for that donation to the museum. This is the M.F. Stearman buildings. I couldn't get any better pictures of them. They did woodworking, and this is on Water Street, and somewhere in that area, over the wood chip part of the building, was the steam whistle. So we started with pioneers who didn't have a clock and didn't know the time of day but could follow the sun, and now we end with the regulation of the day by the factory clock on Prince Edward Island. So that is the end. I thank you for attending, and any questions or comments of your own on your experience of clocks on the island?
We used to hear that whistle in Lower Bedeque.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yes. Well, I think people set their own clocks by it if the clock was off. If your clock had stopped, you could set it by a steam whistle. Yeah, so it was heard well out into the country. Percy, did you hear it?
The whistle?
The whistle from Skirman.
Yes, I remember, working in the field, and when the whistle went off, you went home for dinner.
You didn't need a cow horn lower the deck. You were George.
What about the watch? When did the watches become popular? Or?
Yeah, watches sort of were following in tandem with the clock, more or less. Watches, pocket watches and watches from 1500 were being used. But I don't know on Prince Edward Island when watches came in, but they would have equally, having a watch, people traveling would have used a watch. And you could have used a watch in your home. That's another topic.
How does church bells ring in with telling the time it's time to...
Well, in England,
you hear the bells
in England, traditionally it would be the man and rather going in and ringing the bell at a set time.
In Charlottetown too, so you hear the bells.
Yeah, I think a lot of them are electronic now, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah, and does anyone know? What about United Church bells? Do they ring in the village, don't they? Who rings the bell in Bedeque? Because I hear it, I've heard it, I don't know. I think it's electronic. Peter?
It's not related to time, but one of your illustrations, the one that had the, about the trains and on the island, and it showed the rail line across the island, and then it showed what looked like 3 different exits off of the island. So I would realize one is Borden and one is east. What's the other one?
Well,
Where
there
did
was
it come from?
Shediac to Summerside.
Oh, it went from Shediac to Summerside.
Yeah,
Okay.
Shediac to Summerside, Cape Tormentine to Cape Travers, Pictou to Charlottetown, and there might have been, I might be able to call that up, but does anyone else have a comment on that? How do I escape? Escape, oh yes, oh, I'd really escaped. I turned off the computer. I think I pressed the wrong button.
So there was a boat from Summerside to Shediac.
Yes,
That would
Summerside
carry
to
the
Shediac.
train.
It would be a steamer, and there were no
Oh, okay, just a
there were no rail or car ferries, of
Okay.
course. It would be a steamer, Summerside to Shediac, and Cape Tormentine, I'm not certain that there would be, but it was Cape Travers there. In 1880, they connected the rail line to Cape Travers in about 1888, and ran through Kincora, which you can read in the Kincora history. Yeah, any other?
Was military time ever used on the island?
I haven't come across any record of it. I'm not, this is not the final and complete word on the subject. That would be interesting to look at. We only had a military, there was a barracks in Charlottetown, rather low numbers kept, except during the Tenants' League agitation when troops were brought over from Halifax in the 1860s. And since, after that, I don't know, military time, I assume would have followed normal time, other than their own version.
You said there's a gas-powered clock in Charlottetown. How is that run? Like, what's the...
Yes, I wondered about that myself. Gas, in the late 19th century, gas lighting was common on, I came to Charlottetown as well, but I don't know how you operate a clock with gas. Does anyone know how a gas-operated clock would work? I don't. But you can Google anything now.
Maybe what they meant was the clock face was lighted by gas.
It could be, yes, I
clock
didn't think of that.
Had a
Yeah,
conventional mechanism on it.
Yeah, that sounds more sensible. That you know, it would be like a mechanical clock, but perhaps the face was lit with gas lighting, which arrived in Charlottetown at some time.
I'll give you an interesting quote. I ran an OG clock in my house for 35 years and never oiled it ever. Because most of your OG clocks are in the kitchen, and the kitchen's so greasy and horrible, it's so
Well, yeah, that's very interesting. Anyone else?
Off the subject of time, but what was the point of fulling?
Oh, fulling, I have looked up that and know what it is. Fulling is a process in actually, you've woven your cloth, you know, you have to tighten the weave and you wet the cloth and it actually cleans the cloth as well.
Okay.
So you've got, yeah, it's a necessary process in wool production. Now it's done in factories. But it makes the weave tighter. The water, I suppose, wool shrinks. You know,
Yeah,
and so it's going to be tighter. It's cleaning it as well. You've got soap on it. And it's getting rid of the lanolin or the sheepy smell or whatever. Yes, it's wool.
Okay.
Yes, so that's what it's cleaning, getting tighter weave and improving it. It becomes impervious to rain. The weave. But that fulling frolic, we should bring them back in Bedeque, shouldn't we? Revive them in the Bedeque Museum. But I've seen on television, they've revived them, and I don't know if they've revived them or they've continued in the Scottish Highlands. And they're really quite, interesting to watch, because the women are all, they're pounding one way and then pounding the other, and the song is going with the, with the rhythm of the pounding, and one will sing out and the others respond, and so they certainly sang at the fulling frolics in Bedeque, but they would, I don't know what their songs would be. Or whether anyone had researched that elsewhere.
The National Film Board did some filming of fulling frolic in Cape Breton, at least one. One was in Chittagong, the other one was a Scottish one.
Yeah.
And you see the people singing, and,
Yeah.
and it's inside the home or the barn.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that in Cape Breton as a tourist event. If you go there, you can arrange to go to a fulling, yeah.
Oh, that's going to sound very fun to do that. And especially if they have whiskey at the end and no supper at midnight. There must have been a lot of geese in the deck, unless they were shooting wild geese, but probably they had. It was a time to use up their winter meat, and I expect there would be competition. You'd have to put on a fine evening, a fine tea at 6 o'clock. In the old country, the word tea is still, I got used to saying, we're going to have tea now, means your supper. But it's like my mother, when or cousin, said, we used to use that word here too on the island. My grandmother used to refer to tea. I know we have tea now. But does anyone still use the phrase tea? We're going to have tea. Not meaning you're going to have a cup of tea, but you're going to have your evening meal. Any other questions? Well, we've got, is there more ice cream? It's all
No, it's gone.
All gone. We have refreshments at the back. I remind you of the raffle again, and the next, no more talks till next summer. If you have any ideas for talks, come forward. If you have an interest in a particular subject, I hope we'll have another 6 talks. Your donations are welcome, and memberships as well keep us healthy financially. $25 per year subscription, and you get all of the notices of events, summer talks, and so forth, and you support the museum as well. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.